All right. Welcome to our Writers Program information session. My name is Rudrapriya and my pronouns are she, her. I work as the program manager for the Literary Arts and Music Operating Programs here at the Toronto Arts Council. And I want to thank you for joining us today in learning a little bit more about this program. Joining me in this session is Joyce Toe, Grants and Outreach Administrator. She is here to manage the technical aspects of our session, and she'll be monitoring our chat as well. Also joining me are our interpreters. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to start by letting you know a little bit about my role and how I've structured our session here today. My work at the TAC is about facilitating your access to these grants. I'm here to provide information that will hopefully be helpful to you and also to answer your questions and make sure you have everything that you need to submit a grant application. First, I'll be providing some basic information about the TAC and about this minutes going through what this program funds and walking you through the application so that you understand what you will need to prepare to apply for this funding. Finally, I'll spend a few minutes talking about some grant writing tips, and then we should have some time to answer your questions about eligibility or about any other aspects of the application process. As I'm speaking throughout the session, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat and we'll get to them at the end. I want to acknowledge that the Toronto Arts Council is located on the traditional lands of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. We're grateful for the native stewards of this land who have protected and continue to fight to protect its resources. Their guardianship and their stories are integral to this place, and we're very grateful for the privilege to live and work and make art here. There's some access information that's important for everyone to know about the session. Automated closed captions are available, and you can enable them by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screens. ASL interpretation is also available for the session. And we'll be sending the slides we're using here to registered participants after the session has ended. And a recording will also be made available on the TAC's YouTube channel after the session as well. If you have any other access needs or you want to request a transcript or anything further, you can message us in the chat and we will do our best to provide that. Okay, so I'll start by giving you a little bit of an overview. So the Toronto Arts Council is a public funding body. This means that we operate as a nonprofit entity that engages with artists, organizations, and collectives to support the arts in the city, to fund your projects and performances and artworks. And our job is to make connections with artists and between artists, and to make being an artist in the city more possible and hopefully more sustainable. Now, the Writers Program supports the creation of new literary works and works in progress. This grant is specifically for writers to get funding for projects in the genres of fiction, poetry, literary nonfiction, and hybrid genres, as well as in oral traditions, such as spoken word and oral storytelling. We have two levels in this program. There's level 1 for emerging writers and level 2 for more established writers. And as you can see, the funding amounts are slightly different as well. Level 1 is a $5,000 grant and level 2 is a $10,000 grant. As an applicant, you can only receive this grant every 2 years. So if you received a writer's grant in 2024, you're not eligible to apply in 2025, but you can apply again next year. This applies to our playwrights grant as well. And the purpose of this restriction is to disseminate the funding a little bit better through the pool of writers. So who can apply? Firstly, applicants must be previously published. So that can be in an online magazine, a newspaper, a literary journal, or a collection, or any other venue that is a professional venue. What we mean by professional is that someone other than yourself selected the work for publication and edited the work. So things like self-publishing or publishing your own work on blogs or on Medium or in your online newsletter, for example, those do not count as professional publications. The next thing is that applicants must be residents of the city of Toronto. So not the GTA, but the city itself. A good way to tell is that your postal code in your address needs to start with the letter M. Additionally, applicants can't be enrolled in undergraduate studies at the time of application. So make sure that you're not enrolled in undergraduate studies. Graduate students can apply, but only if the area of study is not related to the proposed project. So I'm going to break down now the specific eligibility requirements for each level of the grant. So to apply for level 1, you need a minimum of one professionally published work listed on your literary CV. This can be a short story, it can be a poem, it can be an article, or a work of criticism, a book review, anything like that. And online publications do count towards this requirement, as long as it's a professional publication. If your project is a written work, like a novel, a collection of stories, or a poetry collection, you should list your previous publications on your literary CV and include the following information. So the place it was published, the date, the title of the piece, and the link, if it's available online. If your project is in an oral tradition, you should instead demonstrate a history of public performance on your literary CV. So your CV can list the places that you've performed the work, along with dates and links to any recordings that might be available online. Now, for level 2, you need to demonstrate that you have a more extensive publication history. So for prose projects, you would need to demonstrate 60 pages of professionally published prose. That's about 15,000 words at 250 words a page. And by prose here, we mean fiction or nonfiction. So those 15,000 words can be articles, essays, stories, lifestyle pieces, etc. For poetry projects, you would need to demonstrate 20 pages of professionally published poetry on your literary CV, again, to apply for level 2. And if you have a professionally published book in the genre of the project that you're applying to the grant for, in that case, you will definitely have to apply for level 2. Okay, so some of the projects that are eligible in this grant include graphic novels, spoken word albums, hybrid genres, prose poetry, memoir, autobiography, and then all subgenres like romance, horror, mystery, crime, speculative fiction, those are all eligible as well. Um, if your project has more than one author, you can include a second author as a co-applicant. That's applicable in the application as well. And Projects that are in languages other than English or French are also eligible, but the samples that you include in the applications must be accompanied by a translation into English or French. Now, projects that are not eligible include screenplays, scripts, commissioned works, cookbooks, travel guides, instruction guides, self-help books, academic works, as well as anthologies. So for this grant, you cannot apply to create a work that is an anthology. You need to be one of the primary authors. In addition, projects that have already received a writer's grant from the Toronto Arts Council are not eligible. You can only receive funding for a project once in this program. Now, what is the grant for? What can you use the grant for? So it is assumed and expected that the grant is paying you, the writer, for the labor of creating the project that you've proposed. There's no budget required for submission in the application because the TAC does not fund printing, self-publishing, marketing, editorial services, or other things that are related to publishing. It's not a publishing grant, it is a creation grant. We fund the creation of the work. If you receive a grant, you will need to submit a final report after the timeline for your project is over. And this report will ask whether you met your goals, whether you finished your project, and it will also ask for you to include the finished project as a PDF as well. It will not ask how you spent the grant, again, because it's assumed that you used it to pay yourself for the creation of the work. So to begin the application process, you will need to go to our portal, which is at tac.smartsimple.ca. And on that page, you will see this landing page, which asks you to log in. So if you don't have an account yet, you should click the button that says Individuals Register Here, which will allow you to open a new individual account. If you already have an account, you can put your email address into the login field and enter your password. And if you don't remember your password, you can click the Forgot Password button and the system will send you a reset link. You should know that once you open a writer's application, you can keep adding and making changes to it until the deadline of June 16th, as long as you remember to save the draft of your application every time that you work on it. And the application deadline is June 16th at 11:59 p.m. So just be sure that you submit your applications by that time. TAC is committed to making our grants more accessible to artists who identify as deaf, disabled, or living with a mental illness. And we provide funded support if you require help to open and fill out an application. So this application accessibility support provides up to $500 per year per applicant, and you must find your own service provider to help you with the application. The TAC will cover the costs by paying the service provider directly. Another support that we offer is an accessibility grant. These grants provide up to $5,000 in additional support for your project if you're an artist who identifies as deaf, disabled, or living with a mental illness. And you can apply within the grant application itself for this support. Now, accessibility grants can be for any accommodation that you might require to complete the project that you're proposing. Supports like ASL interpretation, communications assistance, attendant care, support workers, or equipment rental are all eligible. In the application, you need to describe the accommodation that you require and provide the cost for it. And accessibility grants are always given on top of the regular grant amount, as long as the accommodation is eligible and the grant application is successful. I want to give you a little bit more detail on what is actually required for the writer's application. So there are three components to the application that you need to submit. First is the literary CV. I referenced this a little while ago when I was talking about eligibility. So this is a document that lists your publications or your performance history. This is used to establish your eligibility. Um, Assessors on the panel will not see your literary CV. It's only used to make sure that you're eligible to apply. So in the CV, you just want to make a list that demonstrates all of the places that you've been professionally published. You can include word counts to help establish if you're applying for level 1 or level 2. And you can also provide links to any pieces that were published online. Next is the project description. So this is where you want to talk about your proposed work. You'll have to enter a very brief synopsis of your project, and then you will also have a 500-word field to describe the genre, the format, the stage, and the scope of your project. This is where you can provide some context for what you're writing and explain how far along you are in the writing process and give the assessors some context for why this work is important for your development as an artist, and also, the timeline for when you're trying to complete the work by. Try to answer the 5 W's in this section. So who, what, where, when, and why with regards to your project. And do not list any identifying factors. The grant is assessed anonymously by our panel. So that means that they don't see your name, they don't know who your application belongs to, and your name must not be listed in the project description or in the sample. For the purposes of the project description, you should also avoid including the names of anyone that you've worked with. So that means the names of your previous publishers, previous magazines that you've been published with, anyone that you've worked with, your mentors. Do not put any names in there. Finally, you have your third component of the application, and this is the project sample. So this must be a sample from your actual project, not something that you've worked on before or previously published work. It needs to be unpublished and it needs to be from the actual project that you're proposing. The sample, again, it's not a proposal, not a summary, it's not an overview or a document about the work. It's an excerpt from the work itself. And your sample can be a maximum of 10 pages for a poetry project or a maximum of 15 pages double-spaced for a prose project. And by prose here, we mean fiction or nonfiction. So essentially a format other than poetry. You want to make sure that you submit the sample in a PDF format with a minimum font size of 11 points. And if your proposed project is in an oral tradition, you can upload up to 3 audio files so that there's 15 minutes total of audio material in MP3, WAV, WMA, or AAC formats. And you'll also, in this case, need to provide a written transcript of the audio material that does not exceed 15 pages. So 15 minutes of material and 15 pages of a transcript. Again, you don't want to list your name or any identifying factors anywhere in the document. Sometimes people don't realize that their name is actually in the file name. So check for that and remove your name or any identifying factors. In terms of how grants are assessed, we follow a peer assessment model. So What this means is that program managers such as myself and other staff have no say in what actually gets funded. We put together a panel of writers who are your peers in various genres, and they read the samples and assess the works. So panels are different each year for this program. And in terms of what they're looking for when they read the applications, they're looking for the highest artistic merit and viability. So that means which projects capture their attention or were memorable, which ones made them want to read the rest of the work beyond the sample. Um, and as I mentioned previously, assessments are always completed blind, meaning that the panel will never know who the applications belong to. They don't see the names and they don't know whether, someone won a big award or has published 10 books or has, had a review published recently. They judge purely based on the sample, and so that needs to be a very strong part of your application. After they read the applications, there is a confidential adjudication where the panel meets to discuss all the applications and make recommendations on which ones they think should receive the funding. Because we are limited to a budget, we usually receive many more applications than we can actually fund, and a lot of them are really highly assessed, but we're limited to a set budget each year for this program, and the success rate is usually somewhere around 20 to 30% of the applications. The recommendations that the panel makes also include TAC's equity priority policies, and they are approved by the director and CEO before being finalized and before the results are announced. So I will move on now to talking just about some general pointers and tips for grant writing. Um, you want to make sure that you read the guidelines carefully. Those can be found on our website. Um, and you want to make sure that the project is eligible and that you are eligible to apply for this program and to Toronto Arts Council grants in general. You're more than welcome to contact me if you're not sure if your project is eligible. My contact info is on the guidelines and it will also be on the next slide, so you'll have that available. Yeah. You want to give yourself enough time to plan the project, write the sample, and submit the application. These things take time, and writing about the project can sometimes be harder than writing the project itself. So you want to make sure that you have time to do that. You want to use clear and direct language for our assessors. Um, it's really helpful to be as clear as possible when you're talking about your project. And part of this also includes using your own voice. So grants are assessed based on the content of the application, not the formality of the tone. So you don't need to sound academic or professional. You just need to sound like yourself. You want to be specific about what your goals are. So there's a difference between you want to finish a novel or do you want to finish the first draft of your new young adult novel by next July? Being specific shows that you've thought of everything, and that you're prepared to take on the project. And that's part of what we mean by viability, and part of what the panel is looking for. I recommend having a friend read your application before you submit it. They might catch a typo or bring up a question that you didn't realize you forgot to answer. And you want to double check everything before you hit submit. So you want to check that you were anonymous, that your name isn't on any of the materials, and not in the file name of your sample too. And you want to not submit it at the last second. So try to give yourself a few hours or even a day before the deadline, just in case of any technical issues with the portal, so that you're not struggling with any technical issues. And finally, you can Try to avoid some common mistakes, like being vague about your work or your goals, or giving too many options for what you're going to do. So, for example, saying that it will be a collection of prose poetry or poetry with some illustrations, or, if I can't get illustrations, it will be a series of poetic vignettes. It's too many options make it sound like you don't know what you really want to do. And so I recommend just being being certain to sound intentional in your application. Another reason to double check your work is you want to make sure that there's no inconsistencies across your application. So maybe you've been working on the application for a while and you changed your project as you were going through the application. You don't want the sample to be from a short story, but your project description still says it's a novel. So you want to check for consistencies and make sure that, each part of your application is consistent with what you're trying to apply for. Hey, thank you so much for being here and for your interest in our programs.